Glory had learned early in life to keep receipts, not just of purchases, but of moments. The small ledger she kept in the bottom drawer of the kitchen table had started as a practical notebook. Dates, appointments, little scribbles to remind her to water the peace lily or to pick up milk. Over the years it accumulated more. The way David hummed when he was nervous, the exact time he left the house the day he promised he'd be home for their anniversary, the phrase he used when he wanted to soften something cruel. It became, unexpectedly, her record of truth. She and David had been married 8 years. They lived in a narrow townhouse with sunlight that slept across the floors at certain hours, and a backyard that Glory had fought for, and fashioned into a small sanctuary of tomatoes and basil. David was meticulous with numbers. His job in logistics made him an excellent planner, a man who could forecast delays and smooth them into inevitabilities. He was also easy to love at first, the tidy attentions, the gestures that exactly fit the creases of Glory's needs. He called her Glory like she was a small miracle, and when he still did that in the early mornings before the kids woke, she believed it. The ledger grew a new kind of entry the autumn before everything fell apart. A text message she left open on the phone, running late. Bring the kids to my mother, be home by 9. And the small print she did, the 3 o'clock dentist appointment for Emma, the call at 5:12 p.m. from a number that flashed unknown and then disappeared. She logged his late nights. Wednesday, dinner alone, he said overtime. She logged the odd purchases on their shared card. A hotel with a name she didn't know, charged at 2:14 a.m. She did not at first look for betrayal. She catalogued because the ledger had become her way of proving to herself that the world was as it had been. She was married to an accountant of certainty. Why would the truth move? People like David were stable. People like David planned. She is Glory, patient, reasonable, the kind of woman that thinks of patience as a skill. It saved her marriage once, she told herself. It would save it again. Then Emma, their 10-year-old, came home from a sleepover with a small paper crown and a stain on the sleeve of her shirt. She said nothing at first, but when Glory asked if the crown was made of paper, the child shrugged, mumbled something about Lily and her dad's neighbor, and changed the subject. The detail lodged in Glory in a way that things do when they are too small and become sharp. That night she opened the ledger and wrote without thinking, Oct 14 paper crown, ask Emma tomorrow. The pen moved as if it had a memory all its own. A week later, when Glory found a receipt for a necklace she'd never received and a name she didn't recognize, M. Tavia's, her internal ledger tilted into a different balance. She could have called David. She could have asked. Instead she sat very still and read through all the entries, from the first dinner he'd praised her oven to the last time he'd left a lipstick mark on a glass she'd used and believed was meant for her. She began to see the thin constellations of lies, an old jacket in the coat closet that smelled of another perfume, an unexplained entry in the calendar that someone else's name matched. Confrontation is often thought to be a sudden crack, a thrown plate. In Glory's marriage, truth showed in the accumulation. She watched it slowly. She watched David build small certainties that threatened to undo the whole structure. She tried steadiness. She asked him the easy questions with her voice soft and even. Are you seeing someone? She said one Sunday over coffee, trying to thread the word humanely. David blinked as if she had mispronounced something. No, he said. He tasted like tired coffee and the polite lie of someone who had rehearsed a better version of himself. He smiled and reached across the table. She recorded the moment. Nov 3, he lied. After that, the ledger took on pages. It bore witness to her nights of watching for the sound of his car, the little rituals she invented to keep the house in motion. Glory was not a woman who collapsed into melodrama. Villainy, she'd learned, was usually a quiet thing. Very often it came disguised as a pragmatic rearrangement of the truth. She began to look for patterns, small arithmetic errors that betrayed an extra variable. She lined up receipts, time-stamped messages, an Airbnb reservation with a location across the city on a date David had said he was in the office. It was all very tidy, which made it easier, perversely, to accept that it existed. Emma asked questions sometimes. Did Daddy ever lie? She wanted to know one rain-flattened afternoon. Glory considered the concept as if it were a riddle. She wanted to roll the earth under the child and hide the facts. She did not. She chose instead to answer with a precise, practical truth. People aren't always the same, she told Emma. Sometimes they make choices that are confusing. We keep our eyes open. She did not know in those days how suffocation felt until she learned it had a sound. The small huff she made when she saw David's phone on the kitchen counter with a message previewed from the same unknown name. It read simply, 2 nights, come by the usual. His reply, a heart emoji. When Glory found the photos, arranged late one night in a cloud folder he left open because he had forgotten to log out, she felt a kind of disassociation that was not sorrow, but her body denying the reality in order to climb out of it. They were not only selfies or furtive images, there were snapshots of David laughing with a woman she did not know, resting his head on her shoulder in a way he had never rested his head on Glory. There were messages, tender and possessive. There was a warmth in them that cut like a blade, small, casual infidelities carried out with an intimacy that belied secrecy. It would have been easier to rage. Glory had once been a hot-tempered girl who could make a room crack with a single opinion, but the ledger had taught her patience. The ledger had also taught her to be precise. She took photos. She copied messages into the notebook. She made notes about dates and locations. She calculated the lengths of hotel stays, cross-checked addresses, traced the names. She discovered M. Taviers was Marina Taviers, an interior stylist who had come to his office supposedly to consult on a work project. Knowing the name made it worse and better in the same instant. She learned details about Marina from social media, from casual shares that David had left unguarded. She learned that Marina had a laugh that turned the ends of her eyes into crescent moons. She learned they called each other pet names in public comments, under photos of dinner plates and bottles of wine. They were small things, perhaps harmless, but they were the threads that, when pulled, revealed a map of David's wandering. Glory's first attempts at justice were domestic and banal. She emailed David's office asking for clarification about his travel and found, in reply, airtight alibis. She traced credit card statements and discovered he had set up a separate account to pay for a short-term apartment in another part of the city. It was a fiscal sleight of hand. The very skill that made him good at logistics had been turned on himself. He had traced an alternate life with the same exactitude he used for shipping manifests. She did not want dramatic scenes. She did not want to stand in a supermarket aisle and shout. She wanted a kind of equanimity that left no doubt for him, for herself, and for the children about what had happened. Glory wanted him to meet facts he could not sanitize. The first time she told him that she knew it was not a confrontation. It was a small, deliberate maneuver. David came home late, carrying a briefcase that smelled faintly of citrus. It was 11:23, the house quiet, the kids asleep. Glory sat him at the kitchen table with their ledger open between them like an indictment. She had mapped out everything in columns: date, evidence, time, location, source. No melodrama, just numbers and references. Her voice was even. The pen clicked as she underlined an entry. "Do you remember this?" she asked. David looked at the paper, his face changing as if the air in the room had thickened. He had expected a different kind of debate, pleading, begging, perhaps even immediate forgiveness. He had not compiled his life into evidence before. He had counted on her forgiveness to be automatic, her patience inexhaustible. When Glory said, in a voice that had no tremor, "I know," it was not a plea. It was a closed formula. The night that followed was a quiet, terrible unspooling. David apologized. He tried to explain. He told lies that were not daring but pathetic, about loneliness, about how his office had felt like a safe place. He begged. Glory listened. Her empathy, a deep thing, not weakness but a moral muscle she had cultivated, found the small human lodged in him. She saw his shame like a child's scraped knee, raw and suddenly exposed. She thought not of spectacle, but of the seams of their life: pensions, guardianship, school runs. She thought of how Emma would perceive this unraveling, of how they might construct a narrative that would leave her intact. But understanding is not the same as endorsement, and empathy does not erase the consequences of betrayal. Glory understood the fracture, and she decided the path forward would be precise. She began with small removals. She moved money to accounts David did not know how to access. She called the mortgage and arranged for certain documents to be mailed in hard copy rather than transmitted digitally. She changed the locks. She did not tell him at first, not because she wanted to punish him yet, but because she needed a moment of domestic sovereignty. She redirected mail to a PO box and, on a quiet Tuesday, brought the kids to her mother's house without a note. That night, David woke and found his keys no longer fit the front door. He reacted with anger, then confusion, then pleas. Glory had expected all of it in an order she could chart. She did not scream or beg. She made effects rather than speeches. She revoked the credit cards tied to their joint accounts and left him just enough to cover day-to-day expenses for the kids. It was logistical cruelty in the mildest sense, precise, painless perhaps to an observer, but sharp enough to force a re-evaluation. For a while the household operated in a strange, mediated way. David camped in the spare room, his presence in the house a constant, awkward reminder that bedrock could hollowness. He would appear as if by rote to feed Emma cereal, to help with school projects. Glory accepted his help when the children needed it. She never used the children as a weapon. Emma needed both parents in the practical sense, and for the first weeks, David was present because Glory allowed him to be. But presence is not absolution. When David believed they were neutral again, he returned to certain habits that betrayed his assumption that he had been forgiven out of necessity rather than choice. He left his phone home and did not hide the little things anymore. He believed in the currency of trivial normalities to buy back trust. That was his failing. He thought that small, repeated normalities could overwrite the ledger. He did not consider that Glory had become a meticulous archivist of truth. The turning point for Glory came when Emma was invited to her school's parents' day. David, eager to appear rehabilitated, had volunteered to run the small bake sale with other fathers. He spent the morning in a flurry of participation, laughing easily with other parents, handing out scones. Later, when Glory was helping supervise a craft table, she overheard two mothers talking about the lovely couple whose marriage had seemed so strong. One of them said, oblivious to the history, "He's always so charming, the kids adore him." Glory felt the old, feral thing rise, not the desire to punish David out of spite, but the need to ensure that appearances did not outweigh reality. If the world would gloss over the facts of betrayal and make truisms of nice and charming, then she would do what people do when institutions fail. She would make evidence. Her payback would not be spectacle. It would be undeniable, bureaucratic, and public in its clarity. Glory built a plan in the ledger. It would be a legal and social audit of the life he had tried to split into compartments. She started with documentation and then moved outward. She compiled bank records, cross-referenced them with dates, printed emails, collected screenshots, and asked a trusted friend, a paralegal, to help her assemble a case she could both live with and present. She wanted custody to reflect what the children needed, and she wanted clarity so the world would not mistake gloss for truth. David fought. He mobilized charm and contrition into a chorus, spinning out apologies that sounded increasingly like rehearsed lines. He accused Glory of being cruel, of weaponizing the past. He did not understand, or chose not to, that she was not seeking to destroy him, but to prevent him from living one life and paying for another. He wanted the luxury of having both the respectable family life and the clandestine one. Glory would not allow him the arithmetic of double truths. The divorce was ugly in the way all legal separations are. Papers filed, arguments in front of neutral machines, the cold mathematics of custody evaluated by a system designed to be blind to nuance. But Glory had something else the court could not ignore, a record. She presented the ledger not as melodrama, but as a careful, documented timeline that showed patterns and intent. The first time she placed it on the bench, she felt a strange, electric relief. The judge read with the boredom of bureaucracy and then slowly with understanding. In the room, David looked small and raw, his professional solidity peeled. Custody settled into a shared arrangement with primary placement with Glory. Alimony and support were calculated with arithmetic that made David bristle. He was ordered to amend certain insurance beneficiaries, to disclose assets he had hidden, to relinquish control of some accounts. The judgment was not punitive so much as corrective, a legal calibration that recognized what had been hidden in plain sight. But legal judgment was not Glory, only aim. She wanted him to account socially as well. She orchestrated, carefully and without malice, a public unmasking that would not be a spectacle but would be rather a mirror. After the divorce notices were filed, she approached the school administration and requested, politely and transparently, that their internal newsletter remind parents about discretion, about the harm of duplicity to children. She wrote an article for the neighborhood blog about honesty in parenthood that curiously mentioned no names but told one clear story, of how small betrayals ripple outward and the quiet, steady work of repair. Word traveled in the small ecosystems of suburbia. People saw the legal notice posted in the paper, then the school's quiet statement, then the neighborhood blog, then comments on social media from people who connected corners of gossip to the evidence of public documentation. The unmasking was not a shout. It was a series of small lights focused on a map. In the warm glare of that light, David's carefully carved alternate life could not hide. What Glory wanted more than anything was for the children to be shielded from spectacle. She never broadcast. She acted within the boundaries of law and etiquette. Her revenge, if it could be named that, was a return to truth, to make sure that choices had consequences and that the cozy language of normal did not paper over the harm done. She wanted a world in which Emma could look up and know her mother had been brave enough to choose clarity. There was also a subtler strand to Glory's payback, a reclamation of self. She had allowed herself to be defined for years by domestic competence. She scratched a little at that surface. She joined an evening writing group she had scorned once for being frivolous. She took a small class in urban gardening and learned how to graft tomatoes to produce better fruit. She called her sister and scheduled a trip to the coast, just the two of them, because the idea of being alone without an agenda felt like a new kind of freedom. David tried to negotiate. He offered apologies, later gifts, and public displays of contrition, flowers left on the doorstep, a card at Emma's recital. Glory accepted the civility but not the surrender. She knew that wounds heal only when the person who caused them learns to live within the cost of their choices. She did not seek to humiliate him so much as to ensure that his life had the integrity of consequence. Months later there was an incident that sealed the ledger's new life. David, who had not been careful enough with his social media privacy, posted a photo, an intimate snapshot with Marina, on a weekend when the school's social page was highlighting family features. People recognized the faces. Comments bloomed, some compassionate, some ruthless. Someone in their small world linked to the publicly available divorce filing. The cloud of casualness David had lived in collapsed in a small storm. Marina called him. There was heartbreak on both ends of that particular conversation. Reputations were liable, loyalties strained. For a moment David looked stunned by the consequences he had thought he could partition. The communal field he had expected to be fertile with continuity turned to stubble. People chose sides and some did not. The world, which had been a place where he had assumed he could manage two lives without paying the full price of either, required an accounting. Glory read the online conversation from her kitchen table. Emma, 10, was doing a puzzle on the floor and did not look up. The ledger sat next to Glory's coffee, a benign sentinel. Glory felt a complex quiet. She did not gloat. Instead she made a list in the ledger of what would come next. Summer plans, the way she wanted to tell Emma about relationships, how to teach a child that adults can be flawed but also accountable. Time settled in like a new coat. There were small, imperfect reconciliations. David and Glory attended a mediation with a counselor, not to restart their marriage, that was impossible now, but to create a system their children could live in without being pulled between two narratives. They agreed on pick-up schedules, on language to use in front of the children, on what details to spare them. They agreed, finally, that Emma needed a consistent story, not the sanitized version David had wanted, but a truthful, measured one that explained choices without vilifying either parent beyond the facts. Revenge, Glory discovered, was not a single act but a sustained ethical posture. It asked for clarity, for boundaries, for an insistence that what is private does not become someone's public playground. It required effort to rebuild and refusal to let the world pretend that nothing had happened. It required the patience she had always possessed, now redirected into an insistence on dignity. There were nights when she still felt the raw ache of betrayal. Sometimes, while folding laundry or trimming basil, she would catch the tilt of a memory, David's laugh with Marina, and feel the old fracture like a ghostly hunger. She wrote in the ledger sometimes to the future, "When you feel it, remember you have made a life that has not required deceit." She wrote about small pleasures, mornings alone with Emma, the quiet confidence of paying the mortgage from money that was legitimately hers, the little domestic sovereignty of choosing a new shade of paint. Glory dated a man a year later, a gentle, quiet man named Samuel who worked in a library and who understood what it meant to keep things in order while letting the heart remain messy. Samuel was not a cure. He was a companion who made tea and listened. He did not replace what had been lost, he illuminated new possibilities. Glory moved forward with a caution tempered by wisdom. She loved again with a watchful generosity. David, for his part, rebuilt a life made smaller by accountability. He found work in a city 2 hours away and visited the children on weekends. He paid his support. He dated, at first awkwardly, then with a care that suggested discomfort turned into learning. People changed in increments. He discovered that earning trust is a more difficult calculus than losing it had been. Years later, Glory found herself sitting on a bench at a school event, watching Emma, now taller, wilder-haired, laughing with friends. The ledger, full now of small victories and household lists and the occasional poem she had scribbled, lay in her bag. She thought with no small astonishment, how the ledger had been less about evidence for vengeance than about a return to a life she would choose on principle rather than habit. In a final act that was almost ceremonial, she burned the pages that catalogued the most painful details, not in a dramatic bonfire, which would have been satisfying to a part of her, but in a carefully made bowl in her backyard. The smoke drifted into the autumn air and carried with it the edges of the old ledger, the receipts, the printed emails, the tiny printouts of incriminating messages. She watched the smoke and felt the precise, clean sense of closure. She did not do it for David. She did it for herself and for Emma, and for anyone who believed that justice must always be loud. Her revenge had not been to ruin but to reconstruct, to ensure truth led to fair consequence, to rebuild household sovereignty, and to re-inhabit her life with honesty. That, she believed, was the only revenge that could be called virtuous. When the ash cooled, she wrote a final line in the ledger: "Live by the ledger, live honestly." And then she closed it and walked inside, where Emma waited with 2 cups of tea and a small paper crown she'd made for her mother. Glory smiled, and for the first time in a long while, her hands were steady.